Hello, thanks for joining me for this session. So we're going to talk about scaling your event-driven APIs and put your events to work. So my name is Stephane Mery. I'm a distinguished engineer for IBM and CTO for the event integration portfolio in IBM. All right, so I think all companies want to be more responsive, right? They want to deliver more responsive services, more personalized services. And really, what if you knew what is going on your business right now? What can you do? You can deliver this kind of always on, always up to date, and responsive experience for your clients, right? It's kind of the top of the list of priorities for most CTOs is to be able to leverage events that are flowing in their system to make their services more responsive and reduce the time from insight to action. So what are the use cases? Well, depending on the industry, there are several use cases, but it always boils down to either detecting a threat on your business or an opportunity to seize to improve your top line. So depending on the industry, right, we can talk about fraud detection or suspicious transactions, suspicious movement, which is definitely a threat to your business. We have use cases around operational efficiency, in supply chain, any disruption, could be a threat to the user experience and to the bottom line of the service. And we also have use cases around providing the best offer, the best product in the business moment before it's too late, right? So many use cases are all based on this notion of tapping into events and the business value that we can extract from those events to make services more responsive and address threats and opportunities before it's too late. And the before it's too late is pretty key. So it's really a challenge to do that today, right? The systems or your architecture might not be completely ready to tackle this challenging and to become much more event-driven and much more real-time. First, there is a lot of data that is flowing around with, mobile phone and IoT devices sending events all the time. And most of the time, the analytics is done much later. And if it's done much later, right, we can't tap on what we call perishable insights. That's those insights that you can get from the data in movement. And those perishable insights have much more value than the after-the-fact analytics, right? If you can tap on, that's really good, right? You can deliver services that are much more personalized, much more contextual, and you can seize opportunities or address threats before it's too late. And you have less time to decide. So that's why you need to put in place some kind of insight to action paradigm so that you can take those opportunities of the insight that you get from your events and act on them, right? Taking a decision on what to do and pushing the action. So building those event-driven solutions that support those more responsive services requires a new architecture. And that's where we talk about an event-driven architecture. So if we look a little bit in detail of what is an event-driven architecture, it would look like this, right? You have event sources on the left-hand side. That's a source of your events, right? The events that you need to tap on. There is very often at the core of an event-driven architecture, a messaging technology stack, right? It could be based on queues. It could be based on logs, like what we can do with Kafka events logs, right? But there is a core event transportation mechanism that allows to populate events to your event-driven solutions. Those event-driven solutions are built by processing the events, and that's why we have an event processing capability, which is predominant in an event-driven architecture. And it's also linked to your data architecture, right? You still need to store events and store data in your database or your data lake. you still need to query, you still need to search, right? So there is an interconnection between an event-driven architecture and the data architecture. The way you implement this insight to action paradigm is also linked to your ability to apply analytics in real time and basically apply some business logic to understand the meaning of those events or the combination of events that you are interested in. So that's the business logic and analytics side that we can see on the bottom part of this diagram. I'd like to pinpoint on the right-hand side and the governance, because as with all architecture, governance is pretty important, right? And you need to manage that architecture and the input and the output of this architecture in an explicit way. So now let's link to the notion of event-driven APIs. It's all starting with events, right? So we need to have access to sources of events. So that's new endpoints that you need to tap on. And that's what we call asynchronous API, right? If we take an API view on those event sources, well, we can consider them as some kind of asynchronous API, some kind of new APIs where the behavior is mostly asynchronous. And if we say that our event sources delivering those events are our APIs, well, we need to apply API management to this kind of APIs too. So that's where we start talking about event-driven APIs or asynchronous APIs, and we consider those APIs with the rest of the APIs of your enterprise, right? Your REST APIs, your GraphQL APIs. So that's a new type of API, which is pretty key in the context of an event-driven ecosystem. So in IBM, we created a product called IBM Event Automation to help our clients to build those event-driven solutions and put in place this event-driven architecture. So event automation is made of 3 capabilities that are composable, which means that you can use one or the other, or you can use them in combination depending on what you have already in your system. And those 3 capabilities are the following one. The first one is an event stream, which is basically based on Kafka. That's basically Kafka that we provide as an event transportation layer. Event endpoints management, which is very relevant in the context of this conference and this talk today, which is about applying API management principle to the event space. So it's all based on async API, and I will detail a little bit what we're doing in that space. And the third piece is an event processing framework, which is based on Apache Kafka, which is a critical piece when you want to build event-driven solution in the context of an event-driven architecture. You need something to process those events and extract the insight that you need from those events. So IBM Event Automation is a combination of those 3 things. And if we map that on an event-driven architecture, it's basically providing technology blocks that fit pretty well in event-driven architecture, right? The Kafka piece will be, in this messaging box where we need a core system to transport events. The Flink runtime and the tools we are providing on top of Flink are, positioned in that event processing box. And the governance aspect will be covered by our event endpoint management capability, which brings an event gateway as well as schema registry in a way for you to manage your events and your event sources just like they are APIs. So we map on this slide API Connect capabilities. So API Connect is the IBM solution for API management, and we will see what is the connection between those tools. But before going into that, some common obstacles that our clients have been telling us about, the challenge building an event-driven architecture and the challenge building event-driven solutions on top of that. And the top one is basically discovering and locating the events for reuse, right? So as we said, everything starts with the notion of events. So we need to get those events. But discovering what are your event sources, locating the events that you should be reusing, if a team is providing new events derived from previous events, well, you need to socialize those event sources, those new event streams, so that people can build on top of that. So this overall discovery of event sources and event stream that are relevant for your use cases is a pretty big challenge for practitioners out there. Some other challenges around, uncovering those insights, right? Implementing the logic that is required to transform events into insight. And it's also tapping on a shortage of skills, right? Those event processing frameworks are pretty complex to manipulate, and you need unique skills. You need very strong engineers to manage those systems and build event-driven solutions. But really, the first one is touching on this notion of management, right? API management extended to the event space. So with the explosion of events, right, and more companies are deploying Kafka as the technology stack to transport events into their organization, they are facing an API management-like pain point, right? So they have more and more Kafka topics, and at the end of the day, it's super hard to manage who is responsible for those topics, making sure that when someone is changing the schema of an event, it will not break applications that have been built downstream. So it's basically the pain points that we have seen in the API world that is coming up in the event space as you're scaling up your event practice and you're scaling up the number of projects that are using events and Kafka topics to support those events. How to control access, right? So the overall challenge of authentication and authorization to make sure that only authorized people can tap onto your stream of events. How to manage workloads, right? How to isolate the different workload, how to limit the rates, how to make the deployment more agile, right? And how you provide discovery and self-service. How to prevent duplication, right? How do you socialize and promote the reuse of events? How you stop breaking change, how you manage versioning of your event schemas and things like that. So the IBM approach to API management is built around two products, right? We have API Connect, which intend to manage all your APIs, whatever the type of APIs. So it provides all management capabilities like API catalogs, you can build API products, and it's applicable to any kind of API, right? REST API, GraphQL API, as well as asynchronous APIs, event-driven APIs. And IBM Event Automation, which is specialized on event-driven architecture and event-driven solutions, in which we have event endpoint management capabilities to manage your topic just like there are some APIs. And obviously, there are connections between those two things, and the ability to export an async API from event endpoint management, from event automation, and take that into account in your API Connect holistic management capability. From a runtime perspective, in the API management world, we have this notion of API gateways that is using, some software and is used as a runtime component to interface APIs, right? So that you can apply security and governance on how you access an API. Well, the same thing exists in the event space, and we created what we call an event gateway, which is implementing the Kafka protocol to interface your consumption of events from Kafka topics, right? So that's the equivalent of an API gateway, but for the event space, and that allows us to enforce security as well as other governance policies in the context of event-driven solutions. All right, so to wrap this conversation, Events are at the core of an event-driven architecture and event-driven solutions. It's all starts from events, so you need those events. You need to connect to systems that are able to bring those events. So those event endpoints are becoming some kind of APIs, right? And you need to manage those as APIs, right? There is no reason to manage them differently from the other endpoints that you have in your enterprise, like your REST APIs, for instance. So event sources really needs to be managed as APIs. So you need to expand your API management practice to include event-driven APIs, to include asynchronous APIs. And it's a way to scale up the value of your events for your business, right? The more you document and you make your event sources available to those teams, the more you empower those teams to build event-driven solutions and deriving new events from individual events that you put on those streams and build up insights that you need to improve your business and make your services more responsive. So the only way to scale up the value of events that you have in your enterprise is to apply the management capabilities, just like what we have been doing in the API space for a while. That concludes my presentation for today. Any questions? If you want to know more about IBM Event Automation, let's connect, right? You can reach out to me. You can scan this QR code, and you can access some demonstration and a lot of information about IBM Event Automation. Thank you very much.